All right, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Ranger Bobby James, who would be speaking about Battle of Blackstock, right. So without further ado, an evening with Bobby James.
Well, I want to thank Tom and Ellen for having me tonight. This is, I was talking to Tom, and this is the third time I've spoken at the museum. So I really enjoy coming and enjoy being here. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I'm an interpretive ranger at Musgrove Mill, so I've been there for about 6 years. Basically, I do all the programming there. Talking about programming, we're doing a guided lantern tour. That'll be March the 31st, and that will be at 7 o'clock, 7:45, and 8:30. So we're going to do hopefully 3 different tours. That evening we're going to have reenactors along the trail that'll interact with you. So if you went on one of my guided hikes before, you won't have to listen to me the whole time. You get to interact with the reenactors. So we'll have about 8 stops along the trail. It's been a really well-attended event. You do need to call for reservations, and I did not put that on my card, but the number is 864-938-0100. So if you want to come to that event. Also, April the 28th and 29th, and I think Tom handed out the little bookmark, and I think that does have our number on it. But April 28th and 29th, we're having our encampment weekend. We don't call it a reenactment because we don't reenact the battle. But we'll have right now I've got about 50 reenactors signed up to come to that event. And it's a really good event. We have a really good turnout from visitors. We usually average about 200 to 300 visitors each day. A little bit busier on Saturday and Sunday, but we usually average about 200 to 300 each day. But tonight I'm here to talk to you about Blackstock. Now, Blackstock was an important battle, and Blackstock is a unique site in that it's a protected site. So it's not a full-fledged state park at this point. It's a protected site. The site is under the custodianship of Musgrove Mill. So there's only a full-time staff of 2 people. So we try to go over to Blackstock and keep it up as much as possible. Being such a small staff, it's kind of hard. This past probably 6 months, I was tasked with writing a program, a tour, a guided hike of Blackstock. And that's what I've got my notes here. That's just so I won't miss anything. But I'm going to use that as kind of the basis for the talk tonight. All that research that I've been doing to write the battlefield hike. So like I said, I'm going to use that kind of as the basis for the talk tonight. For those of you that have studied the Revolutionary War, you know the significance of the Southern campaign. I want to give you a little bit of background on it. I'm going to try to keep it short. Sometimes I get long-winded. You know, if I start getting a little bit too long-winded, somebody give me a high sign, I'll kind of wrap it up a little bit. I will try to finish by 7:45. Hopefully, by that time, I won't put everyone to sleep, but I'll try to keep y'all interested. But Revolutionary War started in 1775, and by 1780, it kind of ground to a stalemate up in the northern colonies. So the British decided that the best option would be to begin what became known as the Southern Strategy. To begin that Southern Strategy, the British attacked Charleston. And they attacked Charleston in May of 1780. In that force was a gentleman by the name of Tarleton. A lot of you probably have heard of Colonel Tarleton, or Lieutenant Colonel Tarleton. He garnered a very distinguished reputation for during the Southern campaign. So when Charleston fell, that left the entirety of South Carolina colony open to British occupation. Now, they didn't have a large enough army to occupy all of South Carolina, so they set up outposts in key locations. But at the fall of Charleston, Tarleton was tasked with chasing down a group of Virginia Continental soldiers under the leadership of a gentleman by the name of Buford. And while he was chasing down Buford's regiment, he went through the Santee area of South Carolina. As he was going by Santee, he knew that he was getting close to the homestead of Thomas Sumter. So, as he was passing Sumter's homestead, he sent a detachment to try to capture Thomas Sumter. Well, Sumter got wind of it, heard that the British were coming into the area, so he left. But that didn't stop Tarleton's troops from burning his house. Now, I say that's going to lead up to something, so I promise. I'm leading up to what I'm getting to. So Tarleton, of course, shortly after that, got up to Waxhaws, where he caught up with Buford's regiment. And we all know what happened at Waxhaws. It was a massacre. Tarleton rode in and just annihilated the groups. He says that he fell off his horse near the end of the battle and wasn't able to stop his troops from the slaughter that followed. So we can choose to believe that, or we can choose to believe that Tarleton was just a ruthless person. And I think, honestly, that he was a ruthless person. He garnered that reputation. The reason I talk about that battle is because I wanted you to understand Tarleton's reputation. He got the reputation, starting with Waxhaws, of being very aggressive and riding into situations that he really had no business riding into. And he was very successful at that. Now, we could say that, it was because of poor leadership on the Patriots' part. In fact, with Waxhaws, I think it was a poor decision because they held their fire right until Tarleton's cavalry got to their front line. And by the time they fired, they didn't have time to reload or even prepare for anything else. But Tarleton did get this reputation, a well-deserved reputation, of being a fierce fighter. After that happened in May of 1780, he was pretty well undefeated all through the summer and most of the fall of 1780. Tarleton was. He fought in several battles. He was the bane, if you will, of the Patriots, militia and the Patriot soldiers in South Carolina during the summer and fall of 1780. Thomas Sumter, on the other hand, he was a good recruiter, but after Charleston fell, before Charleston fell, he retired. When Charleston fell, he was retired. He was not actively fighting for the Patriot cause at that time. When he heard about Tarleton coming up through South Carolina, chasing Buford, he retreated. He had, like I said, he retired. When he heard about Tarleton coming up, he retreated up into North Carolina. And that was where he began, he resurrected, if you will, his career. He started when Tarleton burned his house. He awoken, if you will, a sleeping giant in Thomas Sumter. And I say a sleeping giant because he wasn't active. He wasn't actively fighting against or rebelling against the British at that point. When his house was burnt, he had to seek exile, or he retreated up into North Carolina. And there he started recruiting. And he started raising an army, a militia army. After he raised this army, he came back into South Carolina. And he started harassing the British. Now, Thomas Sumter was smart. He did not believe in a frontal, fully engaging the British in a pitched battle. He tried to avoid that. What he did was guerrilla tactics. He attacked supply lines. He attacked ferries. He attacked meals. He tried to disrupt the flow of supplies to the British. And he was doing this in the fall of 1780. Now, before we get to fall in August, Thomas Sumter was surprised I always get these two battles mixed up. So I'm gonna check my notes real quick, but I think it was, and please correct me if I am wrong, it was Fishing Dam Ford. Yes, Fishing Dam Ford. He had camped there. Tarleton was in the area. Tarleton attacked Sumter, and Sumter was caught sleeping. He did not set up his pickets. He was sleeping under a wagon, as the story goes. When the British attacked at Fishing Dam Ford, he fled, and his army was dispersed. Now, that didn't stop Thomas Sumter. Thomas Sumter, there's some people that have negative things to say about Thomas Sumter. But there is one thing that people cannot deny about Thomas Sumter, is that he was a great recruiter. He was able to recruit an army. That's what he did. After the fiasco, the disaster, if you will, at Fishing Dam Ford, he raised another army. And he started harassing the British again. And that kind of leads us up to the fall. I know I've kind of whitewashed over a lot of stuff, but I'm here to talk to you about Blackstock. I'm just giving you some background information because that's my main goal, is to talk about Blackstock. So in the fall of 1780, probably early November, late October, Thomas Sumter is at it again. He's disrupting the supply lines of the British. He's attacking ferries. He's attacking meals. He's attacking small outposts. Anything that he feels like he can defeat, Thomas Sumter is going to attack, and he's doing that. And he's making General Cornwallis very angry. Now, about this time, Tarleton was sent down to the coast around Charleston. And he was sent to find, attack, and destroy another thorn in the side of the British command, and that was Francis Marion. So early November 1780, Tarleton's down near Charleston chasing the swamp fox. And he's not having very success. He's not being very successful of finding Francis Marion. Thomas Sumter is also, like I said, engaging the British whenever he can. So much so that the British, probably the best way to give you an idea of what they think of him, they make him priority number one. They want to destroy Thomas Sumter. They want to destroy his army, and they want to do that so they can continue on up into North Carolina. Now, just to give you I'll back up just a little bit, because I did I hadn't talked about Kings Mountain. So, October, the British have decided that it's time to attack North Carolina. So they start moving up into North Carolina. Tarleton is down on the coast, so Cornwallis decides to let Patrick Ferguson guard his western flank. We all probably know what happened. Ferguson angered the wrong people. He threatened to come over a mountain and put the sword to the over mountain men. And those kind of men you just don't mess with. They got angry. If you make a threat to them, they take it serious. And they came over and defeated Ferguson at Kings Mountain. So that caused General Cornwallis to retreat back down to Camden. So when Cornwallis is in Camden, that's when Thomas Sumter is attacking anything he could do to disrupt the British supplies. Cornwallis is getting angry, getting fed up, is getting frustrated with Thomas Sumter. So he sends a summons to Banastre Tarleton, one of his most trusted generals. He had sent him down to Charleston for a very important assignment to take care of Francis Marion. Wasn't successful in that, but he knew Cornwallis knew that Tarleton was probably the best person that could take care of the threat of Thomas Sumter. So Cornwallis summons Tarleton. Tarleton starts coming up, back up into the back country of South Carolina. Thomas Sumter at the time, and it's probably mid-November, late November at this time, probably around the 18th. He doesn't know about Tarleton for sure. He thinks that something is happening. So he starts summoning his troops back. He's got over 1,000 militia at that point. But they're scattered all over the back country of South Carolina. So he starts to call his troops back in. About November 18th, Thomas Sumter has summoned most of his troops together. And so he's actually starting to move north. So he's around, I think at this time, to give you an idea of where he is, he's probably in a Newberry area at that time. And he starts retreating up north because he's gotten some idea that Tarleton might be on his way up. And he's wanting to get across the Erie River and get across the Tiger River to be able to disperse. So he's starting to summon his troops together. As he's crossing the Erie River, he leaves a detachment there at the ford of the Erie River. He leaves a captain by the name of Patrick Carr, and he also leaves his prisoners. He had some prisoners, British prisoners. Most of them are loyalist militia. As Thomas Sumter crosses the Erie River, he leaves Patrick Carr with the militia, the loyalist militia, the prisoners, at the river ford. And he does that as an alarm system to alert himself so he can know when the British get to that point. Now Tarleton had gotten back into the backcountry by that time, and he met up with the 63rd. That's what I'm trying to find right now because I want to know when he met up with the 63rd, the British 63rd, and he met with them at Brisley's Ford or Brisley's Mill. I've got it written down somewhere. But anyway, he met up with the British 63rd, And it was around that's what I was trying to find. I think it was the Broad River at that point. Let me double check. Oh, here it is. I knew it was the Broad River. And that was on November 18th. So Tarleton got it back up into the area around Grizzly's Ford. It was called Grizzly's Ford, Grizzly's Mill. And he met up with the 63rd that were camped there. And what Tarleton did was to try to hide the fact that he had gotten back up in the area, he sent the red-coated 63rd across the river, across the Broad River. And his dragoons, he waited till nightfall, and he went I think it was about 3 miles upriver to cross, because he wanted to hide the fact that he was back in the area. Well, that would have worked out pretty good, except for there was a gentleman, a soldier from the 63rd British that deserted. And he found Thomas Sumter, and he told Thomas Sumter that Tarleton was back. He was back up in the area. This was probably around November 18th, 1780. Thomas Sumter, when he got that information, he gathered his leaders, his commanders, his colonels together and did a quick war council. And there was a gentleman by the name of, I think it was William Bratton. I think it was Bratton. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Thomas Brandon. Colonel Thomas Brandon, that was part of his commanders, suggested that they use Blackstock as a rallying point. He told, Thomas Brandon told Thomas Sumter that Blackstock would be a defensible area. So Thomas Sumter agreed, and he sent messages out to all his missing troops. Everyone come to Blackstock. So Thomas Sumter starts heading to Blackstock. On November the 20th, he got to Blackstock probably fairly early in the afternoon, maybe about 1 or 2 o'clock. And by that time, he probably had around 800 to 900 militia. And when they got to the area, they started cooking, because they knew that they might not get to eat. You know, they knew Tarleton was coming. So they set up quick fires, quickly roasted some meat. So to back up just a little bit, as Tarleton was coming across the Erie River, he realized that he was not going to be able to catch up to Thomas Sumter before he crossed the Tiger River, if he kept going at the pace that he was going. So Tarleton did a very Tarletonist act. He doubled up his horses, left his artillery, left part of his infantry, and rode after Thomas Sumter as quickly as he could. Remember when I was talking about the Waxhaws, that's what he did at Waxhaws. He rode as quickly as he could to catch up with the retreating militia, or in that case, the Continentals. So Tarleton was tasked with catching up with Thomas Sumter. So that's what he figured that was the way he could do it. He doubled up his horses and rode as quickly as he could. So when Thomas Sumter got to Blackstock, he quickly surveyed the lay of the land. I'm not sure if any of you have ever been to Blackstock. Some of you have, okay. Blackstock has four distinct hills. It has 3 small hills, and then it has a 4th hill behind the 3 small hills. William Blackstock, who was the owner of the land, had put his house on the hill closest to the river, Then he put some outbuildings on the two adjacent hills, but he left the larger hill and back unoccupied. So when Thomas Sumter got there, he realized very quickly that if he occupied those three hills and then occupied the fourth hill in the back, that he would he would have higher ground, and that would give him, of course, a big strategic advantage. So that's what he did. He quickly devised a plan to where he put a group of under Colonel Henry Hampton. He put him in around the house and also in the barn, and those were his best shots, his riflemen. He put Colonel Twiggs, and with him was Colonel Elijah Clark. He put them in the field directly below the house hill, and then the middle hill he put Bratton and Taylor. So Colonel William Bratton and Colonel Thomas, or was it Thomas Taylor? Thomas Taylor. He put on the lower hill, and then the far hill he put Colonel Lacey. And as a reserve, he put Colonel Wynn as a reserve. So Colonel Wynn was actually behind or near the top of that fourth hill. So he was actually behind Hampton, behind Bratton and Taylor, and then Colonel Lacey was on the far hill. And that was how Thomas Sumter deployed his troops. Now, to give you a kind of an idea, the road of Blackstock ran between the hill, the far hill, the hill closest to the river, and the middle hill. The road, or their driveway, or if you will, ran between those two hills, and it had a fence on either side. And that's going to be important when we start talking about the battle. So that fence actually lined the driveway, the road. When Tarleton arrived on the scene, it was roughly about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Tarleton came following the Blackstock Road. There was a hill facing the three hills and of course the fourth hill. Tarleton got to that point and he stopped. And that's kind of odd for Tarleton, because Tarleton was known to rush in as soon as he arrived and he would charge. Tarleton stopped. And the reason we think he stopped is that he realized real quick that Thomas Sumter had a very defensible position. So Tarleton thought, hey, if I could keep Sumter up there on those hills until my infantry arrived and my artillery, he had an artillery piece. If I can keep Sumter occupied until they arrive, probably the next morning, then I can beat Thomas Sumter here at Blackstock. So Tarleton hesitated, didn't charge, and he deployed his troops along that ridge line, that hill. The 63rd, he put on his right flank. His dragoons, his cavalry, occupied the middle and the left flank. As the 63rd was deploying on the right flank, he decided that he would put them at the bottom of the hill and have them start skirmishing with the Georgians. So he's putting them across from the Georgians that were deployed down at the bottom of the house hill, we'll call it. So as the 63rd approached the Georgians, there's some controversy. Some people think that Thomas Sumter told the Georgians to engage with the 63rd. He might have. Some people say that the 63rd engaged with the Georgians. Really doesn't matter at this point, because the 63rd displayed, they formed up their battle lines, started advancing across the field toward Colonel Twiggs and Colonel Clark. 63rd advanced, fired, engaged with the Georgians. Quickly routed the Georgians. Georgians, as soon as the British fired, the Georgians started retreating. So the 63rd keeps advancing. That wasn't what Tarleton said later. That wasn't what his intention was. He wanted the 63rd to display. He wanted them to maybe engage with the Georgians, but he didn't want them to advance. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, unfortunately for the British, we'll say, the 63rd advanced too far. Because they advanced to within range of the Hampton riflemen that were in the barn and around the house. So once the 63rd advanced that far, the riflemen started firing. And then the riflemen from the middle hill started firing. So you had a direct fire engaging on the 63rd British. And they were decimating the 63rd. They were decimating the 63rd to the point where if Tarleton did nothing, he would have lost that entire wing, because they weren't able to disengage at that point. So Tarleton made a decision, a fateful decision, it turns out later, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Tarleton quickly realized that if he did nothing, that he would lose his entire infantry. Tarleton at this point hasn't really been commanding of a full mixed army. Usually Tarleton only is engaging with the cavalry. So he's not really used to fighting with infantry. So Tarleton decides that he is going to send his cavalry down Blackstock Road. Now, before he can start that, Colonel Lacey actually engages his left flank through the woods. Colonel Lacey has snuck up onto Tarleton's left flank, fires on them, and claims that he took out at least 10 to 20 of Tarleton's cavalry at that point. They quickly regroup, repulse Colonel Lacey, and Tarleton directs his cavalry to ride down Blackstock Road and engage the enemy. And we think his goal was to split the forces. Remember I said you had a part of the force on the, we'll call it the home hill, the house hill, and then the middle hill. We think, at this point, his goal was to have his cavalry charge down that road, charge through the Patriot forces, splitting them, and then he felt like he could maybe defeat them at that point. Tarleton's cavalry bravely ride down the road. As they enter the Blackstock Road, they can only go down the road because of the fence. And they could probably only ride maybe two abreast at that point. So all of his cavalry is getting funneled down this road. As they ride down that road, Hampton's riflemen from the house start firing onto his cavalry. Bratton's men on the middle hill start firing. So they stop firing on the 63rd, and start directing their fire onto the charging cavalry. Tarleton had seen that one of his commander of the 63rd, a gentleman by the name of John Money, had gotten wounded. So Tarleton engages with the cavalry, and he is actually riding down to try to rescue John Money. And he does. But the cavalry gets stopped at that point. They are not successful. They're not able to penetrate through the Patriot line. So they have to stop and they retreat. But they did draw enough attention away from the 63rd. So the 63rd is able to regroup. And they actually bypass at that point. They go around the house hill. And their goal at this point is to try to capture the river ford. They're trying to get themselves behind the Patriot forces. At this point, Thomas Sumter rides up, sees, how his men are faring, but he rides kind of like the 63rd, he rode too far. And as the 63rd were retreating, they actually engaged, fired at Thomas Sumter and his advisors, killed one of his advisors, and Thomas Sumter was badly wounded at that point. So the 63rd did regroup, starting to wrap around and try to engage at the river ford. Thomas Sumter, even being shot, sees what's happening. And he quickly sends word to Colonel Wynn, you need to stop the British. And if I remember correctly, he was very dramatic, saying that the entire fate of the nation depends on you at this moment. So Colonel Wynn brings his men down to the river ford, where there's another fence there, lines his men up behind the fence as the British are coming around the house hill, coming toward the ford. Colonel Wynn's men fire, engage the British. The British at that point are probably just worn out. I mean, they've been fighting back and forth. When they run into Colonel Wynn, they retreat after being fired upon, and the British begin the retreat. They retreat about a mile down the road. Thomas Sumter summons Colonel Twiggs, telling him that he's badly wounded and he's turning command over Colonel Twiggs. Colonel Twiggs, by this time it's about 6 o'clock, night has fallen, starts to rain. Colonel Twiggs orders Colonel Wynn to tend some fires. So Colonel Wynn actually lights fires along close to the house, and he's doing this to make the British think that they're going to stay there. So Colonel Wynn is actually tending to these fires. As he's tending to these fires, the rest of Thomas Sumter's troops are making their way across the Tiger River. The next morning, Colonel Tarleton returns to the battlefield expecting to engage the Patriots again. And he gets there and he finds an empty field. Now, the British can't claim victory at Blackstock. The Patriots later claimed victory at Blackstock. So who won Blackstock? Well, if you think about it, Tarleton's goal was to engage Thomas Sumter and put Thomas Sumter out of action, and if possible, rout his army. So when Thomas Sumter's army crossed the Tiger River, they dispersed. Thomas Sumter was wounded in the heat of the battle. He was out of action for 6 months. So if you look at the objectives of what Tarleton's intentions were, he won. But it was a very costly victory. Tarleton engaged, we think, with about 250 to 300 troops. He suffered, well, he acknowledges that he lost 50. The Blackstock family records that they buried 80 British soldiers that day. So he probably lost up to 100 killed and wounded, at least. Maybe even more than that. But he lost something else. He lost the respect of his dragoons. Because he ordered his dragoons into what amounted to a suicide mission. Of course, he didn't know that at the time, but he knew that if he didn't do anything, his 63rd Infantry is going to be wiped out. So he ordered his cavalry to engage. It turned out to be a suicide mission. They lost probably 50-60% of their troops that day during that engaging, during that ride. Now to come back to haunt Tarleton. January of 1781. There was a very important battle fought in South Carolina called Cowpens. During a very important moment of that battle, Tarleton orders his dragoons to engage. They refuse. And we think that goes back to Tarleton ordering his dragoons to engage at Blackstock, and they were slaughtered. So you can see how Blackstock did influence a very, very major battle in Cowpens, a turning point, if you will. So Thomas Sumter lived to be 90 years old, if I'm not mistaken. And he became a well-respected veteran of the Revolutionary War. In fact, we have Sumter County, the Fort Sumter. We have South Carolina Gamecocks. So we remember Thomas Sumter very fondly. Tarleton, like I said, the Battle of Blackstock cost him the respect of his dragoons. So Blackstock was a very important battle. Small battle. Wasn't very strategic. Nobody gained ground. Nobody occupied the battlefield after the battle. But it influenced decisions made, actions at a very important battle of Cowpens. Does anybody have any questions?
Where did Thomas Sumter end up after the war?
Where did he end up after the war?
Yes.
He actually had a very successful political career. He settled in the Santee area where his homestead was, and then he was a congressman. I can't remember for how many years, but he did have a very successful political career after the American Revolution. Yes?
The road that goes into Blackstock is kind of rough. Is there any plans for that to be paved?
That's a good question. And I don't have an answer for you at this moment. At this moment, there is not any kind of set plans to pave that road. However, if you remember when I was mentioning Blackstock, it's a custodianship, it's a protected site. We would like to develop Blackstock, but we need money. So we're not able to do a lot at Blackstock right now. We do what we can. We cut the battlefield. I'm in the process of writing a battle tour for Blackstock, and I'm hoping by writing the battle tour that'll pave the way to get interpretive signs set up there as well. Yes.
So the area is accessible to the public?
Right now, yes, the area is accessible. There are no facilities there.
Any markers and stuff like that?
There is what we call Monument Hill. That's the third hill. That would be the hill that Lacey was on, Colonel Lacey. But there is a monument there.
Okay.
And there's a historic marker at 49 and Blackstock Road. But
It's on the beaten path. And
Yes.
take a Jeep up.
yes.
Have y'all been able to do any archaeology?
We've actually done some, LiDAR in the area. We've done some metal detecting, and that's kind of how we know where a lot of the fighting took place. So we have a better understanding of the Battle of Blackstock. Blackstock has been a mystery for a number of years. So now, after having that, I think that was done about, if I'm not mistaken, about 4 years ago. There was an extensive study done at Blackstock with metal detectors and LiDAR, and we have a better, like I said, a better understanding of the battle.
Were you able to preserve what you found?
Yes, there we have we actually at Musgrove we have the artifacts, a lot of the artifacts that were found out at Blackstock. Yes.
Anything left of any of the buildings?
Oh, gosh,
Nothing left?
There's some rock, there's some rocks piled together in different locations on the field, but there's nothing that would tell us, this is the hill where the house was. We know that because of maps that have been passed down, but there's nothing there.
And where those residents lived, was that part of the battlefield? Where those people live up on? That was part of the battlefield too, right?
From what I understand, where our parking area is, where the kiosk is, some fighting took place there. But further up where the hunt club is and other people, I don't think any fighting took place that far up. Any other questions? Yes.
Any chance of a sign where that road is? Because I've been up and down.
We actually have signs up there now.
Yeah, okay.
Union County got a grant, and they've actually put up Blackstocks, as you're going down 49,
Right.
there's a sign there. It says, turn on the Blackstock Road now. Go down Blackstock Road, there's a sign there at Monument Road. So yes, there are some signs out there now. So I can actually send somebody out there from Musgrove, and they can actually find it now.
Because I couldn't tell if I was going
No, you can't. There's nothing. For a long time, there was nothing there. There was no signage at all, but there are signs there.
And if you're interested.
Yes, sir.
What's there to see and do at Musgrove? I've never been there.
You've never been to Musgrove? Okay. So, Musgrove Mill, we have 2 miles of trails. We have a 1 mile looping trail that is on the same side of the river as our visitor center. And that'll loop around down to the river, and then it'll come out over at the pond. We call it the British Camp Trail. Reason we call it the British Camp Trail is because the British were camped in that general area. We also have a pond and a picnic shelter. We have the visitor center as well. Then on the other side of the river where the battle actually took place, we have what we call the battlefield trail that'll lead you to the field where part of the battle took place. That's a 1.5 mile trail. And then also at the beginning of that trail, we have a waterfall. And then we actually have access to the river, the Erie River, where people can put in kayaks and take out at that location. And then we have different programming going on all year. I do a battlefield hike once a month. The next one will be whatever the first Saturday is in April. I think is it the 7th?
The 6th.
6th,
I'm
okay.
gonna be in Charleston now.
Okay. We do it, we offer a battlefield hike at Musgrove every Saturday, the first Saturday of every month.
I
Yes.
also want to say, you're just like history, you want to visit historical sites, Scott. Musgrove Battlefield is really not far from Blackstock.
No, we're about 10 minutes away from
And
Blackstocks.
then down the road is across Keys House, where Jefferson Davis came to on his way to the south here. So you got 3 places nearby that you can go see.
And then just a little bit further from Cross Keys is Rose Hill Plantation.
Yeah, right here.
Well, I hope y'all enjoyed it. Thank you for having me tonight. Thank you.